And here, have you seen the Houston payoff sheet that's been circulating on the Twitter machine over the past few days that several people have retweeted it? Because it's one of the pieces of paperwork that went out in the Paul Bosch estate sale. And people, got a hold of some of these things. But this one caught my eye for a couple reasons. But the one with Bockwinkel and dog on top.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen it, but again, a lot of these make the rounds. They go around like every couple of years, someone discovers it for the first time. But yeah, I saw that.
Well, I was looking at it in a different respect
Heenan.
than
I thought Bobby Heenan was the interesting thing on there.
Oh, well, he went with Bockwinkel.
He didn't always go with Bockwinkel to Houston.
He went with Bockwinkel for that one.
I'll get the payoff.
Anyway. Because he was written in at the bottom, I'm wondering if Nick just said, "God damn it, Bobby, you're coming with me. It's going to be a huge house. I need you. We got to do this thing with dog, whatever." But there's a couple ways that we can look at this, and just the payoffs that the guys got is just one of them. But for other research I've been doing lately, this fits. Paul Bosch was the last promoter, apparently, in the United States to use the old time method of paying the boys, how you figured the formula that it was supposed to be for paying the boys. And he actually did it. Now, Sam Muchnick would have been the second to last, but he had retired by the time this show took place. And it's also the one that Jimmy Crockett testified to in a deposition in one of the Midnight Express lawsuits of how the promoter was supposed to figure how the boys were paid based on the gate. And it's the formula that he learned from his father. And in that instance, I then applied that to the gate and what we got paid for being the main event, et cetera, and found out that he underpaid us. When you know who won the pony. But the old formula, especially the pre-television era, I'm not talking about pre-television, it's still through the 50s, maybe even early 60s, some people, and the old holdovers that were promoters of towns, major markets in the old days, like Bosch and Muchnick would hang on. But it was before the modern explosion of every territory had to have TV in every one of their markets and had to fucking run this building, and the rents expanded and things got more complicated. And so who's going to pay the price for it? The fucking boys, right? But the old formula, and Brian helped me on this because sometimes I don't explain mathematics well. Stop me if you don't understand what I'm saying. The old time promoters formula for paying the wrestlers on the card, allegedly, was that you took the gate, the after-tax gate. And in this case, this Houston event did $93,700. There were 11,214 people paid and 29 freebies they gave out. So the gross was $93,700. The 3% state tax was $2,811. That means the net was $90,889. And so if it was 90 grand even, supposedly the formula is you take 30% and you pay the boys. So that would be around $30,000, right? A little bit less for 30% instead of 33%. And of that sum of money there, the 30%, the main event would get 60% of that, and the rest of the boys on a card would get 40%. And you could do that, could be any figure from $100 on a preliminary match to $500, whatever, but that would be the pool of money that was available to the rest of the card was 40% of the 30%. Have I confused you so far?
You haven't lost me yet. Now, one question before you get back to this.
Yes.
How much of this jives with what Jim Crockett said under oath in the Beckley trial?
Well, that formula is exactly what he said. But the problem is when I figured it out based on the gate there and that we were the main event, what we got paid, it didn't fucking work. But we were $150 short a piece or whatever it was. But theoretically, that would be the formula. And so if 30 grand is the amount of money you're paying the boys and the main event gets six, that's why the Sam Muchnick St. Louis main events that we've talked about, the payoffs of $4,000 and $5,000 and $6,000, and the next guy on the card would get 1,200 or 800 or whatever, because Sam Muchnick, the main event in St. Louis was everything. And so that's what he attributed to drawing the house and keeping his business going. And that's why he had the greatest main events in the NWA. So point being, technically, that's why the boys were supposed to get 30% of the house, and the main event was supposed to get 60% of that 30%. And that does account for Muchnick's payoffs in St. Louis with Paul Bosch at the Sam Houston Coliseum. He did 90 grand, $90,889. He paid, by the way, $9,088, or 10% of the house went to booking. That was the booking fee that went to the fucking San Antonio office for using their talent. That's the period of time when he had split from Fritz in Dallas and was using the San Antonio guys of Joe Blanchard. So for the cooperation in booking the San Antonio talent, the San Antonio office got $9,000 off a show they didn't have anything to do with. And the guys that worked in San Antonio made as much this night each as they did working in the San Antonio territory the rest of the fucking week. It's insane. But nevertheless, out of that 90 grand, not even including the 10% booking fee to San Antonio, Paul Bosch paid the talent $29,648, or right at a third of the goddamn net gate. And that's why Bockwinkel and Dog for the AWA title that was in the main event got the big payoff. They each got $3,000, which in 1982, today's money, is right at $9,900. So that's why Bockwinkel had wanted to buy into, and did buy into, the Houston office with Paul Bosch.
Yeah,
he owned 10%.
Yeah.
Because when he retired, he wanted to move there and take over from Bosch as the promoter. And he made dates there to establish himself as a draw to aid in that, endeavor. But point is, and it's also is flying down to Houston, and come on, Bobby.
Well, also, Bosch didn't want to use the NWA World Champion anymore after Harley race.
Well, yes, because he was on the outs with Harley for the no-show and etc. And Nick had been established. The AWA champion was the world champion there. And that's Bockwinkel brought Bobby, and Bobby to manage got $1,200, which is the 36, almost $4,000 today, to be in his corner. And then they actually, I'm thinking that he probably, I haven't done all the math on this to break down if the preliminaries got 40%, the main event 60% or whatever, but he also figured in Gino Hernandez, Tommy Rich, Mil Mascaras, and Wahoo McDaniel, and Tully Blanchard. So I'm assuming they had a tag match, and Mascaras worked somewhere else. Mascaras got $2,250 plus $250 trans. So I'm thinking that Mascaras was just an attraction on the card, and that tag match from San Antonio was Gino and fucking, who would have been? Would have been Rich and...
Well, I was going to ask you that. When did they, because I know Terry Funk has said the reason he knew like it was over as a promoter was when fans in Amarillo were asking for Tommy Rich. When did they actually get cable at TBS in Houston?
Probably by then, I would say. But they would have definitely had video anyway. But point being, there's a tag match in there where everybody made $2,000, and that's like $7,000. And Mascara's got $2,500 to be on a fucking card. And then, superstar Billy Graham got $600 plus 175 trans.
Ooh, 82 superstar Billy Graham. Ooh.
But he was where was he at that point? He was
getting ready for his WWF comeback as Kung Fu Billy Graham.
He may very well have, been auditioning it down here. Yeah, but listen, Hacksaw Duggan, Ricky Morton, Ken Lucas, Bob Sweetan, Scott Casey, Killer Brooks, Jimmy Golden, all got $600. That's like handed one of these guys they were making probably $700 a week tops in the San Antonio territory at that point in time. And, boom, here you go. Tiger Conway Sr. got $100 to watch the back door. Buck Robley got $1,200 for being the booker at that point in time, I believe. Peter Burkholz got $600 for being the son-in-law. But this also makes me question, Brown, because this is the second best Sam Houston Coliseum ever. The last Stampede remains the biggest gate. But with 11,214 people, they did $93,700. They told us we had 12,284 people and only $102,000, and our ticket prices were higher. Because here is the problem. Paul Bosch was still in full control of Houston, as he had been for so many years at this point in time. But when his business went down, as we've recounted here in the past, working with the San Antonio office, and he made the deal with Bill Watts so that Houston became one of the Mid-South towns. Watts took over the payoffs in Houston. And Watts started paying the guys that were on the Houston cards on the same check as it all came out of Oklahoma. But before it came out of Oklahoma, it went to Oklahoma. So I'm wondering if we did more than $102,000 at the Sam Houston Coliseum that night. Because I know that we were in the main event, but we didn't get, of course, this was a single main event, but we got $2,000 apiece that night, me and the Midnight. So anyway, is that in any way, does that explain how that, when you think about it, the wrestlers in the 30s and 40s and 50s made more money adjusted for inflation and considering the details than a lot of their counterparts in the 60s, 70s, and even 80s in the territories? Because, as expenses grew, the first thing they figured out was to not pay the boys as much. And then it just became the way that things were.
Well, the other thing, too, was the houses were never really the same. That WWE, then and now, makes so much money, they can kind of pay anyone anything they want. And even if they give a guy $15 million a year, you could possibly argue that if he's worth that, he may be worth a lot more and they're underpaying him. But back then, it was all based on the house. Whether it was the Garden or whether it was the Sam Houston Coliseum, you had to draw the house in Houston. It's crazy to think that this is then, and then within 3-4 years, they would start seeing such a collapse in ticket sales that they would turn to Vince. But it all is dependent on. But you have guys who, again, WWE can pay them; they earn it because they're making that much money. They got a lot of people in AEW make a lot of money, but do they actually bring it in? But the expectation's there, and I think, the idea of being paid off the house is a foreign concept in 2025.
Oh, it's not just international. It's foreign. It's alien. It's Pluto foreign.
The idea of being paid off the house or paid off the pay-per-view are both like dead concepts.
And you know what? I'm sorry, but as a former performer, it gave you something to fucking work for, right? Oh, shit, I'm going to goddamn get this thing going and it's going to draw and I'm going to get a payoff. And then I say, I'm making the same amount of money if I take a shit. It does,
Yeah. Would you feel the same today if like the last Stampede happened in today's kind of world? And after each night, Triple H held a press scrum and announced, once again, we've broken every record we've ever had. If you were part of that system, would it feel the same? Would you have the same bragging rights as you do right now for what you guys legitimately did? And that people came to see that match. They didn't come to see the brand Mid-South Wrestling. I mean, people want to see other matches, but the match drew the house. Can someone say that today about WrestleMania? Can someone say, well, I drew a, $100 million house. Did you? Did your match?
Yeah, yes and no. Some people can say that, but it's more a cumulative track record over time rather than any one match because sooner or later, a lot of people get a shot at the WrestleMania main event. They've still kept special, obviously, but you know, WrestleMania is going to draw, King of the Ring is going to draw, fucking Survivor Series is going to draw, Royal Rumbles. It's all the brand, the trademark. This thing has gotten way too big to pay on the house, and it's going to draw regardless of who's in there. It's just how good it's going to draw and how good it's going to be. What I think was unfortunate about wrestlers' finances for a period of time is, like I said, the guys in the 30s, 40s, and 50s were making a fucking fortune compared to what everybody else was making doing anything similar or even anything else. And then suddenly, for a couple generations there was a lot of fucking poverty-stricken fucking wrestlers. And then now it's blossoming into where guys can make a fucking fortune in this business now, sometimes without even ever selling a fucking ticket. But there was a period of time in the middle where, that's where you hear of all the guys, I was eating bologna sandwiches and sleeping in the back seat. But the problem is, up until now or the modern era, you actually did have to sell those tickets.
Like when Lex Luger came in, and all guys like you, not that you were one of the workers, but you were in the back with them. You talk about the house. You talk about how much it drew. You may want to brag about, hey, we, did this at the Superdome.
Oh, yeah.
Did he have the same mindset? Because he had a guaranteed contract. He's one of the first guys you could say none of that mattered to him in terms of what he was going to be paid.
Well, and truthfully, when he first came in, there wasn't really any fucking brags for him to make on his own. He was in the group, right? And he got smartened up enough not to brag about it by the time he was in single main events. But and even that wasn't ridiculous in terms of the contract for Luger for the potential that you saw at the time. It was, a little above, definitely above guarantee. There was no other guarantees, but it was a little above the level of the other, 3 or 4 or 5 fucking top singles guys working in the company at the time. But it wasn't like, it wasn't ludicrous like when, I guess the best, when Vince gave Mark Marrow the guarantee. It wasn't like, what the fuck? Like that, because it was obvious to everybody that there were tons of top guys in the WWF at the time that could fucking run circles around Mark Marrow in any aspect of the business. But you're giving him the big guarantee to go, what the fuck? With Luger, everybody looked at him like, yeah, I can see, he can make about that much money and draw money if if he comes along. It wasn't just, guys were still jealous, but if they had to admit it, they'd say, yeah, I can see it.
But also back then, whether it was Luger or the Road Warriors or you in the Midnight Express, you can get these guaranteed contracts. Your fate was still in the hands of the booker. I mean, although someone like you and maybe Luger, once you've been around a while and the Road Warriors had input, nowadays, especially like in AEW, there's not only do you not need to draw to make the money, how many of these guys would have any idea of what to do, what to say, or how to behave to do that? And there's no one there leading that way. you guys got those guaranteed contracts, but it wasn't like if you failed, it would have been on just you. It would have been on the booker.
Yeah. And because I've said before, it's hard for great talent to overcome rotten booking, and it's awful hard for great booking to fucking draw with rotten fucking talent. You need a little bit of both. But that was the thing about the territories, is that the natural pecking order would kind of be sorted out, because guys that drew in one place would get multiple opportunities in other places, usually, to do the same thing. And over time, when they won more often than they lost in that aspect, then they would get better reputations and be brought to bigger territories, etc. It wasn't like, well, we'll put this guy out there, and if he sucks now, then he's ruined over the whole country. And also, being so many territories, there were great places for really talented guys, not only in the ring, but behind the scenes, potential bookers in the office, whatever the fuck, to make money. If Bill Dundee, who nobody looks at and says, oh my God, what an incredible career. They said, well, Flair moved to Charlotte, never had to go anywhere, and Lawler was big in Memphis. Bill Dundee comes over from Australia in 1975, didn't leave really the Tennessee territory until the end of 83 to go to Mid-South and be the booker. So over that period of time, what is that, 9 years? I guarantee you, adjusted for inflation, between what he made from Jerry Jarrett and what he made from fucking gimmick sales pictures, he easily made, in today's money, $2.5 to $3 million. For 9 years, he lived in the same town. He didn't have to travel to a town any farther than 250 miles away. He worked 6 days a week, be off on Sunday, home almost every night except one. Top guy as a babyface and a heel. It not only used well during that whole period of time, one of the top stars, most popular guys, became the booker at a few different points. And fucking, that's in the territory days, that was success. That was, a lot of guys in other territories would be envious of that motherfucker. But unfortunately, people don't know how to look sometimes at the measure of whether you were successful or not in the wrestling business. And he was the idol of all the teenage girls in the Mid-South area. Not the Mid-South wrestling area, but the actual middle of the South. Here.
When did Dundee settle? Like, when did he feel comfortable enough? Because the last thing a lot of wrestlers wanted to do was buy a house to settle down, and then you find out you're getting booked down the card or you're not getting booked at all. When did he feel comfortable enough to settle and have his family there?
Well, he and George Barnes, had been a tag team in Australia, and Bobby Shane had recommended, because they couldn't get used, Barnett wouldn't use them over there, and then the conglomerate that bought after him wouldn't use them, and felt they were too small, et cetera, et cetera. So Bobby Shane had told him, go to Tennessee to work for Jerry Jarrett, not Nick Goulas, right? He said, don't you tell him you came to work for Little Man. And so they came in January of 75, and I think that, well, I know Dundee bought his house in the summer of the fall of 1977, because they got the down payment for the house the 2 weeks in a row where Dundee and his wife Beverly got their heads shaved in the matches with Lawler. Because that was those 2 nights, even $3,000 a piece, $3,000 per head. That's $6,000 in 1977. I think that's about 35 grand or whatever in today's money. They used that as the down payment on their fucking house. And I mean, by that point, it was pretty obvious that he was figured in. And again, when you're talking about, you work 6 days a week in a territory where you never even have to see the airport, and you're in the car every day, but you're also working a show in your hometown once a week. And You're making the equivalent of what would today be it was 300 grand a year. A lot of independent wrestlers would take that, right? And did I mention the girls? A lot of independent wrestlers would
You
take
mentioned
that.
his wife. You mentioned he had a wife.
He had all of them things. Bill Dundee was a very, very popular fellow with the young ladies at the matches.
So they make the down payment on the house when they do the hair matches. When he gets the job booking in Louisiana, that must have changed a lot of things. He didn't really think he was going to have to go somewhere else and do that. What did he do? Did she stay at the house and he lived in a hotel? Like, how did Dundee live in Mid-South?
Well, I wasn't following him around, but no, he kept, I think he kept the same house because remember, he went back to, that was the Tennessee territory was his home base. He had a run, which they had an apartment in Louisiana. But my God, I know how much money we were making. I know how much money he had to been making. He probably either rented out the house. I never asked him or whatever, but I believe he kept the house. Went back there, was back in Memphis for a while in 85 and again 87, 88. So he was in and out of there for quite a while. A lot of times guys in those days would end up with a house in one place and having to be renting something in another place, but only if you were successful enough to have a job in two different territories, it was worth it, I guess. I kept my apartment the summer of 83 in Nashville. I never moved out when I went to Atlanta. I said, I'm the top manager of this fucking place. I'm not putting all my eggs in one basket. And so I paid 2 months rent and I was right back and I'd never even moved my furniture. Got to think ahead. What are we doing here?
This is your show. Right. We're having a good time.
Hey, you know what you've got to do? I told you that formula, Brian, the formula for figuring out payoffs and how much that guys should get and thinking ahead. Sometimes it's confusing. You should have professional help when you're in business. You should get professional help if you want to go into business. But once you're in business, you need professional help covering you with all the things that they might not have just your viewpoint of things. They might be able to bring experience and competence and things like that, right? A professional platform that can have beautiful templates to match your brand style and help with everyday tasks like enhancing product images and writing descriptions, generating discount codes, AI tools, things that will soon take over the world that you want to be in on. That's our friends at Shopify, Brian. Because instead of worrying and fretting over whether Paul Bosch is going to give you 60% of the 40% of the 90% of the after-tax gate, you can just open your own business. And instead of the wrestlers in the old days living out of the trunk of their car, well, you can drive around town and sell stuff out of the trunk of your car. And Shopify, they'll even help you buy a new car to sell out of the trunk of.
No, they won't. That is something they absolutely will not be doing.
Well, indirectly they will, because they'll make you enough money. They'll make you enough money that you could afford to buy a new used car.
That's still indirectly or directly not them doing it. That's you doing it with your profits from your store with Shopify on the Shop app and everywhere else.
Yes, indirectly. Yes. What if people haven't heard about your brand? Well, Shopify helps you find your customers with easy-to-run email and social media campaigns. And once you find them, they're going to give you their names, addresses, personal information, social security numbers, pictures of their significant others, and where they work. And that way you'll know where to find these people and say, hey, give me some money. And what if you get stuck, folks? Well, Shopify is always around to share advice with their award-winning 24/7 customer support. Let's say shit goes south and your whole thing goes haywire and you call them up and you tell them what the problem is. 24 hours, 7 days a week, there's somebody there to tell you, well, you're just fucked. And that's how you make money with our friends at Shopify, because if you have a dream a dream of owning your own empire, you got to start somewhere, and that's with making the first step to get help from people who are smarter than you are. And Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all the e-commerce in the United States. So who the hell do you think you are? You think you're too good for Shopify? You think you're better than me? Well, right now, I can get you a better deal than anybody. You can sign up for a $1 a month trial period, $1 a month, so they can show you what they can do, and then you'll never want to be without them. Go to shopify.com/JCE, shopify.com/JCE for making money. Only $1 a month, and you'll be farting through silk from this point forward. Brian, you'll be strutting and cutting with your brand new online barbershop. You know, they've got that now. You stick your head in front of the
we're at the
computer
end.
screen.
No need.
And they can cut your hair.
Who?
I saw that on the news.
Who can cut your hair?
The online barbershop. They just take a laser beam and then you stick your face in front of the monitor and they shear it off by laser beam technology.
Once again, Weekly World News is not sponsored by Shopify, but what they could do for you and your business is invaluable, or maybe just valuable, actually, now that I think about it. Shopify, they power our store, of course. The brand new Lazy Booking shirts, the Drive-Thru shirts, Travis Heckel artwork on shirts, ArcadianVanguard.com, or in the Shop app, just look for Jim Cornette with our friends at Shopify.